Alright, let's talk about the gacha. As a proud free-to-play player, I can tell you right now, I like to think I'm winning. The gacha system is one of the most infuriatingly addictive mechanics found within gacha games. Nowadays, modern gacha games have a bunch of different gacha systems, like the step-up gacha, or the rates-up gacha, or the tantalizingly sinful limited gacha. But regardless, the basics of it are pretty much the same. You spend digital currency that's often considered premium by players to try to get units or equipment from a finite pool which you'll use for yourself in the game. This is called rolling, or pulling, or summoning, or gacha hell. Ultimately, players spend to get a chance of getting something that they want, and more often than not, they end up failing. But the excitement of a gacha feeds off of that failure. Gacha games are so popular because players have the strange idea that they're practically guaranteed to get their favorite character for whatever reason. It's that feeling of blind excitement when you roll for characters or items you want, without any guarantee that adds flavor to the game. Of course, there are many other elements that make gacha games so engaging, but that's not the point of this video right now. As a free-to-play player, I tend to keep my eye out for many different features. Often, it's what's going to give me the most mileage that I'm willing to risk my currency in exchange. After all, as a free-to-play player, what I have is essentially my entire metaphorical life savings. This mileage can be different for every game. It may be something that will make my gameplay more efficient, and make my life easier as a result. It might be a fun character or equipment that lets me formulate plans by incorporating that unit into my tactics. It may even be the simple enjoyment I get from watching a very nicely designed graphic run across my screen. But regardless, the beginning of each game is pretty much the same. They give you a brief introduction on the gameplay elements, throw a bunch of free materials at you to get you started, and leave you wondering where the heck you're supposed to go from there. But of course, all good things must come to an end, and at the point the game stops holding your hand, they will never really give you that much of a special bonus from that point forward. So let's talk about the times the game does come back to you and offers you something really good for free. And that brings me back to two games, Final Fantasy Brave Exvius and Puzzle & Dragons. Right now, Final Fantasy Brave Exvius is going through an anniversary celebration event, and I have no idea what's going on with Puzzle & Dragons. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is that currently both games are giving spectacular offers for the gacha. Final Fantasy Brave Exvius offers players the chance to get up to 150 units of varying rarity, depending on the amount of days that they have logged into the game, while Puzzle & Dragons is literally giving players 100 free premium units, which, to emphasize, for free. This is the kind of deal games give players in order to retain their player base. It is far more difficult than it may seem to produce an advertisement to make players want to play a game, because something like this isn't exciting by any means. If anything, video advertisements will only pander to players that have a solid understanding of some other aspect of the game itself. For Fate Grand Order, it's the Fate franchise. Final Fantasy Brave Exvius feeds off of the Final Fantasy franchise. Puzzle & Dragons is a puzzle game with anime-like aspects. The Alchemist Code is pretty much left treading in the water as it doesn't have much outside appeal. I mean, sure, it's like Final Fantasy Tactics, but there's literally a Final Fantasy version of this game available to download for free. These types of games would have to rely on other sources to garner attention, whether that's through collaborations of other materials or just having good art. It's a pity, as these games have some legitimately interesting mechanics incorporated into them, but that's hampered by the very bonuses the game gives you when you first begin. Sure, it's a struggle to play if you have nothing at all to start with, but if you're given basically everything, it's difficult to understand what makes a game so interesting when you can clear content without giving it any attention at all. And as a result, players often leave these games without interacting with the more engaging later game content. Let's use Puzzle & Dragons as an example. At first glance, it looks like a pretty simple puzzle game. Swipe and you win. Grab some nice looking materials and fuse them into some nice looking units to make them stronger. Change them into their next form and rinse and repeat. But as you keep progressing, the game begins to introduce you to new elements that exist to hamper your progress. There are poison orbs that will hurt you if you match them, but will hamper you if you decide to leave them on the board. Some enemy monsters have shields that prevent you from damaging them, and will require you to control their damage output or just break them entirely to bypass this mechanic. Every unit has a different ability. specialty, leader skill, passive ability, leading you to create all kinds of teams for different types of content. And using an active ability at a moment to save you from a game-ending situation, it's cathartic enough to make you feel that you've just become a pro player. Is there anything more ridiculous than a pro gacha player?
映画の感動だったら1800円だし、僕のその FGO での感動がね700万か。
And that's how I got hooked on many of these games. I began to learn the depth of them. I worked strategies around different content, and I felt rewarded when I cleared a particularly challenging level. There were other things too. Games like Fate Grand Order and The Alchemist Code had a whole cast of colorful characters alongside some particularly fun stories that drew me in. Final Fantasy Brave Exvius had some surprisingly spot-on pixel art. And, well, Puzzle & Dragons didn't really have much else, but its gameplay and the level of ease it incorporated was enough to convince me to keep it. And now we come back to the gacha. Make no mistake, these games are created as a source of revenue for its producers. Entertaining us is just a byproduct. Of course, as a player, the time and money we dedicate to the game benefits them. And as a free-to-play player myself, I'm probably contributing much less than the average player. I haven't spent a single cent on any of these games, all because I've never felt the need to. I have, however, spent enough premium currency to make myself promise to be more careful, only to spend it all again when an incredible feature comes out. Which leads us to the situation. When the game throws an incredible offer at me, of course I'll jump to grab that opportunity. But then I have to wait and think. You see, while these two games do promise incredible units, my own sense of value for them will reasonably be different. For this introduces an aspect many players might already know about, a ranking system. Probably better known as tier list, this system revolves around the idea that units that share a rarity do not necessarily have the same amount of value. Let's use Final Fantasy Brave Exvius as an example. Here we have 4 rainbow characters. Normal tier lists would probably prioritize them in this order, in accordance to their descending value. But my priority list would be something like this, because one is cute, one is free, one can contribute to free gameplay even long after the unit himself becomes irrelevant, and one is someone I don't really want to be seen next to. Take out the free one and this guy ends up becoming second place. I understand that Gilgamesh looks imposing, but it just doesn't feel that way for me. He ends up looking goofy, and this reiteration isn't a goofy character in the first place, so that divide causes a problem. Regardless, at this point I think it's best to talk about the deals from these two games. I'll be looking over the awards that I have received, and I'll briefly go over them. Even if you don't understand these games, I'm fairly certain that you'll be able to understand how highly I viewed my gifts. So the units that I got here in Puzzle & Dragons were released in a basic form, meaning that if I wanted to evolve them to a stronger form, I'd have to get all of these materials first. Normally that wouldn't be as hard as it seems, since Gung Ho gives materials like this through the POW egg machine here. Just pull and you get 10 random evolution materials or enhancement materials. The rates aren't as absurd as the rare egg machine, so there's no harm in pulling here. But more often than not, premium gacha machines in Puzzle & Dragons would pop out the monster at its penultimate stage, making the final evolution a breeze to achieve. But that seems to be the price for 100 free units. Unfortunately, I have to ruefully admit that despite the fact that all of the units I got here are rainbows, I didn't actually get as many great units as I thought I would. The most valued units in Puzzle & Dragons are those you would use often in a team, and I didn't get many that I would actually use. Granted, I am really experienced in this game and thus have a lot of powerful units. And to be fair, you can tell that I got some pretty great ones, like this unit here. Just look at the animated art as compared to something like this. By the way, look at the art evolution in Puzzle & Dragons. I mean, just look at this evolution stage and then check this out. The whole style is completely different. But all in all, I'd say that I only ended up getting 5 units that I value from 100 free pulls. Furthermore, the normal rate for spending stones on a premium gacha like this is 10 stones per pull, meaning that I may as well have just spent 1,000 stones. It's not too complicated to save stones in Puzzle & Dragons, as they generally give you 1 stone per day. But at the rate Puzzle & Dragons has exciting events like seasonal costumes, collaborations, and just a literal look at this powerful featured unit, I find it rather difficult to save stones. Alright, now for Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. I logged in enough days since the game's release to perform 5 free summons on this banner here, which would net me 50 units, and 7 summons for the banner below, which gives me 7 new units alongside some materials for enhancing them. Units here come in 3 essential colors right out of the gate: blue, gold, and this ruby pink color. Ruby pink is the highest rarity that we can get from the summon, and thus is often highly regarded by most players. That's not to say lower rarity units do not have their uses, as they have something called a Trust Master reward, where you fuse duplicates into each other to receive a sometimes powerful piece of equipment that would be valued more than the unit themselves. These Trust Master rewards can then be equipped onto the higher rarity units to boost their power. As you can see, the 7 units I got from the second banner are mostly blues. Trust Master rewards aside, that means they aren't good. Even gold units aren't very useful stat-wise. But in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, equipment and organization is often more important in gameplay than the actual unit themselves, so that balances out the issue a fair amount of the time. And for the 50 units below, well, I heard that the rates were pretty bad, but I think I lucked out in this regard. Out of the 5-10 summons that I could perform, I ended up getting 3 ruby pink units. Granted, that means I only got 3 very valuable units from 57 summons, but I'm still glad I really didn't have to spend anything. But in retrospect, after receiving both gifts, I think I can confidently say that both of them weren't that valuable. Of course, they were essentially free, as all I had to do was log in to receive them, so it's rather obvious that I wouldn't earn too much. But I think there's a more important lesson to be learned here. Quality and quantity are not equal in value. Puzzle and Dragons gave me 100 free rainbow units, but I only ended up getting less than 5 units that would actually benefit me. Final Fantasy Brave Exvius gave me 57 free units, but only 3 of them were essentially considered rainbow and are units that I already have. But ultimately, I value the prizes I earned from Final Fantasy Brave Exvius more than those that I earned from Puzzle and Dragons, as the units that I got could at least serve as stepping stones to get some powerful equipment. Compare that to Puzzle and Dragons, where the most I could do is keep the units and hope they get buffed in the future, or sell them for semi-premium currency. These 2 games aren't the only ones that give away free gifts. The Alchemist code gave every player a free 10 summon for this week, but it's offset by the fact that leveling a unit to make them into their strongest form practically requires you to get many duplicates of them. Combine that with the fact that you need a lot of duplicates, and it really kind of dampens the gratitude you feel from receiving someone new. And ever since Fate Grand Order has been released since 2017, it has only provided 4 opportunities to select and keep one 4-star unit. There is no such thing as a free premium gacha row here. Given that this is a game with a less than 1% drop rate for a single specific 4-star character, this was practically worshipped as a gift from the gods, which may be a surprise to other player bases. I mean, this is a game where the chances of getting any 4-star unit is basically equivalent or less to getting a higher rarity character from a different gacha game. So why do players have such varying reactions to deals like these? Fate Grand Order has some of the most ridiculously abysmal rates for gacha games, but still remains as one of the most profitable. Of course, a lot of it comes from the fact that there are many players that like the Fate series. But you have to keep in mind Fate Grand Order was the entry that actually beat out every other release in popularity. I believe a lot of it has to do with one simple fact. You don't actually need a 5-star character to excel at the game. Getting a rarer character, more often than not, just lets you clear things faster. Some 3-star characters are basically watered down versions of powerful 5-star characters, letting them clear content with relative ease. And when the game gifts players free 4-star servants during events, they're often powerful enough to boost a player's team by a fair amount anyways. Compare that to games like the Alchemist code, which has a clear difference in power level between each unit. Sure, many of the lower rarity characters are great at supporting, but there isn't a single low rarity character that can deal enough damage or provide enough boost to do so. And while Final Fantasy Brave Exvius lets lower rarity characters provide some value with their Trust Master rewards, past that they aren't of any use whatsoever. Puzzle and Dragons is even more selective in a strange way, as while there is a lot of potential variety in team building, you're ultimately just looking for that one card with the one skill or active ability that you need to really complete your team. But even with that said, I have had a lot of fun with these games so far, and I think I'll stick with them for the foreseeable future. I feel like these kind of events where they give away free stuff are really a double-edged sword for the game themselves, as by giving players so much free stuff, they ultimately end up pushing them away from the more complicated gameplay. I think this kind of dilemma can easily be solved by lowering the bar that restricts players from entering harder levels of content, but I do understand that this should be done in moderation. On the flip side, players who don't receive free stuff of a high quality get turned away by their relatively abysmal luck, making them complain even more about the game itself. But in the end, gacha games are, at its base, games that reward you the more you spend. There are definitely players out there that can get by without having to spend a single cent, but there are a lot more players that clearly get rewarded by the units they sacrifice their time and money to get. Yet, in order to prevent the player base from leaving the game in disgust, gacha game developers have to hand out free goods periodically to entice them to stay. That's not to say that you should not look a gift horse in the mouth, but at the same time, we have to realize that free isn't necessarily good. There comes a time when we have to think about the games we play and see if the entertainment factor really offsets the amount of time and energy that we devote to it. And yet, with that being said, you have to realize that the gacha game system itself is surprisingly transparent once you clear away the clutter. It's refreshing in a sense, the same way where you realize a majestic horse isn't so regal the very moment it shows you its teeth. And with that cursed image now stuck in your brain, thank you for watching, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Comment below on your experience with free gifts from gacha games, and drown in the sorrow of having to get free blues or silvers, or whatever it is that definitely isn't good.